on the show, we usually have the guests bring something they want to talk about. It's okay if you didn't, but I was just wondering if you did so we can tee you up in the event that
that's
you did.
super rational, but I definitely did not.
Okay, you're
all
fine.
good. Yeah, don't worry.
Then we'll just talk.
Yeah, statistically, that's usually how it goes for us. So
Good. Yeah. How great I am and how awesome of a person that I always show up.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Easy peasy. We could get a tight 2 hours out of that.
Yeah.
Easy. So
after judicious editing.
Yeah.
All right.
That's great.
Well, cool. So you've got this wedding celebration coming up. What's the circumstances there?
Yeah. So my wife and I got married a year and a half ago. Fantastic.
Nice. Congrats.
Best decision I ever made. Thank you very much. I never thought I'd get married, but I love having got married.
Nice.
But we didn't do like a giant ceremony. My wife's requirement was every dollar that goes to like a fancy wedding ceremony doesn't go towards buying a villa in Italy and priority. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But we promised my grandmother that she'd be able to be a flower girl at our wedding. So we have to kind of stage like the cosplay of a wedding to fulfill upon my promise to my grandmother.
Does your grandmother know that she's being gaslit here, or is it something that she is well aware of?
She is well aware and leans into it. She's like, this is all about me. That's the way I like it. So
there's a party, those hors d'oeuvres. I imagine you have a new outfit. I mean, that sounds pretty good on your end as well.
I'm not wearing my Slamerican hoodie.
I was gonna say. You mentioned before we started that you kind of have a more alien abduction look right now. The camo in the beard. I mean, you're leading into it a little bit. That's all I'm gonna say. If I saw you at a dive bar and you saddled up to me, I'd be like, this guy's gonna tell me about aliens.
Yeah, we're here to discuss like who really built the pyramids, right?
Oh, okay. Dude, I read the wrong books coming in here today.
I was not expecting the answer to be Sasquatch. I was not.
That floored me.
Yeah.
Floored me.
I've not seen that one before.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness gracious. Well, everybody, welcome to Monomaniacs. This is a show where we bring people on. We talk about things that they're interested in, things that we're interested in. Pretty low-key, pretty chill show.
Yeah.
If you're interested, of course, like and subscribe. We always love that. And today we've got a very special guest on the show.
That's right. We have Zac Hill, co-founder and COO of the Office of American Possibilities. I got that correct?
That was exactly right. Yeah.
There we go. So for people who might not know you, because I've only recently met you, we got introduced through a mutual friend, and we had a really great conversation on the phone. Feel free to tell people, what you do and, why you're on the show.
Fantastic. Yeah. So I run a thing called the Office of American Possibilities. And what that is basically a venture studio for initiatives that we like to call civic moonshots. So early stage social and civic initiatives that try to solve big problems by bringing people together across divides and common purpose. So that's a lot of words to say. We're basically a company that launches companies. And some of the stuff that we've created are initiatives like Welcome.us, which is like the epicenter for refugee resettlement in the United States. Frontline Justice, which aims to be kind of like the hub for non-lawyer human capital in the legal representation space. And More Perfect, which is kind of like a set of SDGs, like the UN SDGs, for democracy renewal. So we've done, at this point, 8 or 10 initiatives like this, and we're basically trying to break through like the partisan divide in DC and try to get things done. So
you take people with big ideas and you give them the resources to make those a reality. Right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Well, great. And part of the reason we have you on is because you've done a lot in your life. Dylan actually has a very specific question for you.
Yeah, very specific.
Something he learned about you that he wants an explanation.
Listen, on the car ride here, I listened to a very particular interview on Planet Money and NPR. And I'm interested to know, how did you make $14,000 in 5th grade selling Beanie Babies? How did it happen?
Thank you very much for that question. Yeah, so first, I hope that I made more money than that. If so, it's been a long time.
With inflation, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. Because what are you, 75, 80?
I'm well on my way to buying a house by the time I'm 60. No,
yeah, okay, there you go.
Basically, yeah, I was in the Hickory Ridge Mall, which is not necessarily the place that you want to be hanging out when you're in 5th grade in Memphis, but that's where I was hanging out. And I noticed these people beelining that they'd like robbed a 7-Eleven. Like they looked like they were getting away with something. And they had these like fluffy little animals in like under their armpit. Like, I don't know, you're stealing like paper towels from a gas station or something. Yeah. I was like, these people have thought they've gotten away with murder. And so I see them run by, and then I asked the next person, like, what are those? And they said, quote, "These are Beanie Babies. Do you have any?"
There you go.
I do not have a Beanie Baby. If I had a Beanie Baby, what could I get for it? And they were like $10 a piece. And I'm in 5th grade, so $10 is like, a fifth of a video game.
Exactly.
Like,
I was literally going to say, you're 5 away from a Sonic cartridge.
No, I was balling, man. That was like Mortal Kombat 2 had just come out on the Genesis. I'd learned Kung Lao's finishing moves.
Yeah.
My life was where it was at. So I went down to the Happy Name store and noticed that they were selling these things called Beanie Babies for $5. And that was 100% markup. So I bought the limit with, I had like one of those, I'd happened, as it were, I was going to Babbage's with my savings to buy a video game. I instead used that to buy out their Beanie Baby supply and stalked around the mall like it was a labyrinth with a minotaur in it to find the person that had offered me these $10. Unloaded my stash to them. Unknowingly, like, learn how to hustle on the street corner with these stuffed animals, and the rest is basically history. I was very lucky. My mom worked for the phone company, so I got the internet before a lot of people. So I could find like stores in Maine that were selling, these random elephants for like $10, and I could flip them for like $300. It was like margins that you'll never see again. Exploiting that. So. I built a little empire and got out of it before it buried me.
So before I ask a follow-up question, I have to say, I was going to the Babbage's, but I bought Beanie Babies. It's probably one of the most 90s ass sentences I have ever heard in my life. To be frank.
That being said, also, the sheer force of will at that age to not go to buy a video game, to instead make an investment, that is insane.
Yes.
It was like the opposite of the marshmallow experiment. I was just like, it was agonizing, but I was like, I just saw the dollar signs in my little head,
So is this something that's sort of driven you for most of your life, is those dollar signs? Because at that age, if I was sitting there and somebody said, oh, you can get these for $5, I'm buying them for $10, I would have said, awesome, and then I would have gone on with my life. So what is it that caused you to focus on that?
So I'm very grateful for my parents in this regard. Like I'm sure my parents did all kinds of stuff for me or whatever, but I never really had like an allowance. It was always like do XYZ nonsense and get XYZ dollar. And I'm sure there's like an entire therapeutic manual that could be written about like why that's a bad idea. But for me, it just made the world like exceptionally clear, right? It was like, I know exactly how many A's I need to get in school for how many quarters in order to have a subscription to like Game Informer magazine, right? And like when you're in 4th grade, like that delimits your world, right? Like what else is there but that, right? So it was just like, it was just very logical. It was like, do the things, earn the dollars, get the stuff. And ironically now I'm like not particularly motivated by money or whatever, but it was a great kind of causal relationship between like, figure out what you want, do the stuff you need to do to get it, do that stuff, and then get rewarded, right? It was
reasonable.
Kind of beautifully, it was like beautifully parameterized in this.
So not to jump the shark here, but when you're making that calculation, what you're describing, in my mind, because something we haven't mentioned yet is that you worked as a game designer as well, and you still work as a game designer on occasion, if I'm not mistaken.
Periodically. When I get the itch.
Yes.
Understandable.
When that very much sounds like a gamification of that relationship, and that sounds like something that would inform something like game design. Do you think that's accurate?
I think that's probably exactly what made sense. I mean, games are all about kind of like creating an experience by using mechanics to pursue a set of goals, right? And so I don't know that I knew what my goal was. I mean, it wasn't like buy a game or buy a house or whatever. I think, my parents made just enough money that I understood the difference between like having enough money to be okay and like not having enough money to be okay. And I think the big difference between like each of my parents has one sibling. And like, I love my parents' siblings, but like both of my parents were the ones that were on like the right side of doing fine. Mm-hmm. And their siblings were on the wrong side of doing fine. And when I'd ask about this, because like as a kid, you don't know what the social taboos are or whatever. So you're like, why is my Aunt X really not looking good today? The simplified answer that you'd give a kid was like, well, like everything in life costs dollars and like she doesn't have enough of those. So it's really unfortunate. And so I think that like in some subtle or not so subtle way, I just connected the dollars of like, if I have, or connected the dots between if I have enough of these dollars, that won't happen to me. Mm-hmm. Right. And, and it didn't. So clearly my 4th grade, 5th grade self was onto something.
Yeah, I'm really picking up what you're throwing down here because I feel like we had a very similar situation growing up. Yeah, I mean, I did not make $15,000 selling Beanie Babies. Yeah, I wasn't to that degree.
We had a friend like that, but that wasn't us.
Yeah, that wasn't us.
We were the guys who were on your entourage. We're like, yeah, boss, where do we gotta go?
Yeah, come on. You go in, you buy the limit. I'll come in after you, buy the limit.
Yeah.
All I need, just give me a copy of Mortal Kombat 2. That's my payment. No, I mean, just the idea of having sort of an example. That it's just right on the baseline, right on right over the degree of not so in a bad spot where you sort of resent the situation and you resent your place, or not so above that you think, oh, life is just this way, right? I don't have to really necessarily work for anything. So yeah, I completely get that. Well, I wanted to say though, you were mentioning thinking of dollars in sense of percentage up to buying a video game. To bring it back to your previous experience in game design, for me it was in high school working a retail job. How many hours until I could afford a pack, right? Like how many packs out of for a Magic card pack, right? And so
So again, he's jumping the shark here, but Zach here
to be specific
was a lead designer on Magic the Gathering from 2009 to 2012, if I'm not mistaken.
2012, exactly. Yeah, I was on the Pro Tour from 2001 to 2009. Designed the game from 2009 to 2012, and then was a commentator on the game for a few years afterwards. And I still do some stuff with them periodically or whatever. I love all the folks at Wizards, but to your point, that's dipping my toe in the deep end when I'm just fiending for some dragons and some angels.
So let me ask you a question then. That to me seems like an ideal pipeline for a lot of people, right? Where because looking at your experience over on LinkedIn, right? You didn't go directly into game design right out of college, right? But you played Magic, I assume, through that period. Played it enough to get good enough to be on the Pro Tour, and then leverage that into a career. Talk a little bit about that. How did that experience go?
Yeah. So it's one of those things that it sounds. You're always tempted to like narrativize the story as like more compelling than it was. The truth is, I was just hammered one night and like drunkenly wrote an email to them, being like, "Would you hire me to?" Which is actually whatever, but there was some stuff that teed it up. So I'd done in high school a bunch of policy work for Harold Ford Jr., who was a congressman. And I parlayed that into a position as a writer at this alt weekly in Memphis called The Flyer. I then was a policy analyst for the mayor of Memphis, or at the time the mayor of Shelby County, a guy named A.C. Wharton. And that teed me up to this thing called a Luce Fellowship, which was this awesome postgraduate scholarship to go to Asia to do work in an area of my quote unquote expertise. I don't know what you're an expert in at 21. But
exactly.
I was an expert in not being as hungover as I am now.
Which for a lot of people, that's a huge gap right there.
I leveraged that expertise. But so I went to Malaysia to do this policy work, and it was amazing. Yeah. But when I got there, many of the other folks on my fellowship were saying, it's insanely hard. You're moving to a totally different country. It's at a crazy time in the world. You don't speak the language. You don't know anybody. You don't know the norms. And it's very lonely. I did not experience that because I landed in Malaysia as this like popular Magic the Gathering personality.
Yeah.
And I had like 200 people inviting me to cookouts, like inviting me, like all this. It was like walking the red carpet or whatever. And people just treated me with such generosity that what I experienced was like, is it really all this policy stuff that I'm doing that connects people and bridges, people together across divides? Is it really, that helps us understand our common humanity? Or is it stuff like these games that no matter where we're from, no matter what we've experienced, no matter what language we speak, religion we believe, any of these things, give us a commonality to share space together. Right?
Yeah. I have a quick question about that, actually. What language, I know this is it's a weird side step. What language do they play Magic the Gathering in Malaysia?
So that's a really funny question because when I was going to Malaysia, I had to learn Bahasa Melayu, which is normally the language everyone spoke.
And I doubt they translated Magic at that time into that language.
Very much didn't. Yeah. And when you go to Malaysia, it's a whole political decision what language that you want to speak, right? So there's ethno-nationalist parties for Malays, Hokkien Chinese folks, Tamil Indian folks. And so the decision of what language to speak is also sometimes a political decision about what you support and what you believe. So after doing all this work to try and learn this language, and I was very bad at speaking the language, but I thought that everyone just spoke English anyway. It was the non-threatening, intermediate whatever, which was one of the many cultural things that I learned via that.
Yes.
No, yeah, that's an amazing perspective. I really do like that. And would you say that you brought that into your design principles, like the ability to have it be sort of a bridge of communication between individuals?
I would say massively. I'm actually about to release a Magic article. It's the first article I've written in years
for Wizards.
I'm writing for a site based out of New York called Hipsters of the Coast, because of course it is based out of New York. But it's all about kind of like what it means to design an accessible experience. And I designed this thing called a cube experience that I think showcases this, but we'll see. But the point of all of that was a lot of what I tried to bring into my career as a designer at Wizards was, let's make the game accessible and let's make the game intuitively and emotionally enjoyable without sacrificing the strategic depth and the strategic richness that's why people play this game, right? And I think that sometimes Magic design over the course of its 30-year history gets into a place where it's like really exciting if you're like a huge Magic nerd and you're like, I have gained tempo advantage by casting Spell Snare on your remand, all this nonsense that like doesn't sound like English. But like a lot of Magic boils down to like awesome experiences and like cool like dragons and like fighting with your powers. And I think that it's those visceral emotional experiences that allow it to be this kind of transcendent game in this transcendent community. And you can sometimes lose that. So, I wouldn't say that I was like waking up and going to sleep thinking of this every day. But those experiences were brought in mind when I came inside and tried to say, like, how can we make Magic a game that's enjoyable to as many people as possible in as many ways as it can be?
Yeah, to bolster what you're saying, when we were active Magic the Gathering players, you were you were working pretty strongly at that point. And I think that really helped, what you're describing, because, because you one of your first sets that you worked on was Dark Ascension, right?
Yeah. Yes. The first credited set I think I was on the design team was Dark Ascension.
And that's around the time that we started.
Yeah, it may have been, if not the first set we did.
Yes, I know it was something in the Innistrad block. I don't remember if it was Dark Ascension.
I don't remember exactly which one. But yeah, and then we played right up until I think
the last set that we ever played was Cons of Takir, which I know you didn't design, but you worked on the ideas and
I was on the design team of that set.
Yeah, so literally it just perfectly locks in our entire, back when we were active players in high school. That was like that entire period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I definitely did feel like I was being welcomed into the hobby in a way that may not have been, the case if we had gotten into it earlier, because, when we talked on the phone the other day, you mentioned, the set that launched before you came on the team was Time Spiral, which is a famously complicated set. And I know that would have been incomprehensible to somebody of our skill
you're not
level.
the only people that was true.
Yes. And so you wanted to make this more, digestible and whatnot. And that worked for people like us, right? Who were just getting into the hobby. Was that something that, I know that the community kind of backed against that in a lot of ways, but we can maybe talk about that a little bit later. What were some things that you did? And we can make this a little bit more general for maybe audience members who may not know the nitty gritty like we do. We could get into ultra specifics, and I know that we did on the phone a while ago.
I was going to say, this isn't a Magic podcast?
No, I'm not.
Maybe one day,
Maybe one day. But we just talk about the sets that you designed.
Yeah.
That's the whole show.
Go card by card.
Card by card, 15 minutes
Right, spend 4 hours,
Yeah. I'm sure, honestly, with the amount of podcasts out right now, that's something that's,
there's a market for it.
There's a market for it. But what I'm saying is, what were some of the principles that you brought to Magic the Gathering when, you were living your dream at the time, right? You were sitting down in the conference room or somebody's house or whatever. You got the whiteboard. Like, what were the things that you were bringing to the table that made it more accessible and attracted people like us at that time?
So like very unironically, you'd start a meeting saying like, how is this set that we're working on going to bring people closer together? And like, this sounds like super nerdy, but like I was writing literary fiction at this time. So like, bear with me.
As in Magic the Gathering literary fiction, fan fiction?
I wish it were. It would probably be more successful if it was. I was writing like The Believer and McSweeney's, like all these like literary
Yeah.
But I was literally asking like, how is this set going to connect us with the richness of the human experience rather than distract us from our everyday lives, right? And a lot of the time you play Magic as a distraction, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that like fullest possibility of the game can actually like engage us more fully with like dimensions of life that it's sometimes hard to notice otherwise. Yeah. And so just like taking that out of the realm of like a pontificating obnoxious statement, like when we were designing Magic 2013, which was like an intro experience to try and get people in the game, we very seriously ask questions like, when you read this card, will you feel like this game wants you to be a part of it? Or will you feel like it's some sort of in-joke that you don't get, that you almost resent for taking advantage of you, right? You've already bought the pack, right? And you've spent money on the pack, and you're looking at it, and you're like, was this a good purchase or was it not, right? And so we tried to make it so that when you were looking at cards, you felt like you got what was going on, you learned and discovered more with each pack that you look at, and that you could crucially, like, even if you didn't totally get everything, each pack that you bought would allow you to not only make your decks better, but like express yourself more fully given whatever was exciting to you, whatever was standing out to you. And I do think that's like a really important part, not just of Magic design, not just of game design, but actually like of all art, I would argue, is like, are you offering an experience that gives people a pathway to discover something they didn't understand before, right? And I think if you're doing that, you're doing your job as an artist, you're doing your job as a designer.
Go ahead.
I'm just about to say, you're speaking our language. We're both liberal arts people. I was an English major. He was a history.
I was literally going to make a liberal arts equivalency in a second here. But I feel like there's a mechanic specifically, I feel like that illustrates this, right?
Sure.
And
I sure hope so.
Let me know if I'm going too far down the rabbit hole here. But the Ravnica sets, which the Return to Ravnica sets, which you were a part of, which ultimately I think is what made us fall in love with the game. Yeah. Right. The guild system, and all of that. But my favorite guild, not at the time, but since has become my favorite guild, is Orzhov.
Oh yeah,
I love Orzhov, and I know I think your guys' sets weren't the best for Orzhov. I'm gonna say,
that's probably true.
yeah. I think,
right.
but I'm gonna talk about Tithe because Tithe, I think mechanically is not worth it ever. But so for people at home who may not know, so Tithe is really simple. It's a card that allows you to pay one extra resource to take one life from your opponent and give it to yourself. And Orzhov is supposed to sort of be this kind of high church kind of bank / religion cabal thing with undead and stuff like that. Yeah. And I personally just love the theme. I love the nature of it, and I think mechanically I love black white, so I love Orzhov. But Tithe is something that mechanically perhaps unbalanced in a negative direction, but I think says something. Like you're communicating something about the human experience. You're communicating something about devotion. You're communicating something about the way that we interface with religion or finance. You're giving something of yourself, or perhaps, this thing is taking from you, right? And that, seeing that on a card, I was at a point in my life where I couldn't really understand that it wasn't amazing, and my Orzhov deck was just an enchantment deck. But I was looking at it, I was thinking to myself, like, this makes so much sense to me, and it's communicating something. Like I can have a conversation with somebody across the table about this mechanic in a way that has a concrete value.
And just to piggyback on that a little bit, it also has a visceral reaction to the person you're playing it up against, right? Like, is when you use Tithe, it's like that bastard, right? Because it's an active ability. It's not easily countered. It's just like they pay the life, and death and taxes. It's something I got to do, right? Yeah. So I think it's very well executed.
So Orzhov, it literally was called Orzhava, the Church of Tithes. I think the mechanic maybe formerly was called Extort or something.
Oh,
like
yes,
that.
you're right. I'm wrong. I did not say it is Extort.
But it's revealing that that Tithe is what stood out, right? Because that's what's going on. It's like, you got to pay the piper, dog. Yeah. And, while the mechanic in Constructed only had like 1 or 2 hits, it was one of the more powerful mechanics in Limited because of the experience that you're talking about. It was basically like you're trying to play a game, you're trying to get ahead, and your opponent's kind of doing the same things that you are, but every time they're just getting a little bit more ahead, right?
They're extorting you.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was the experience that we wanted to go for, which is like, and regardless of whether you're a Republican, you're a Democrat, what you believe or whatever, I think that we all have the experience of these like giant institutions that feel like no matter what we're doing, they're winning. Right. Yeah. And that's what Extort is kind of designed to reinforce. Right. And so I think that each of the guilds in Ravnica was designed to kind of take a dimension of the experience of human society and just like exaggerate the hell out of it in order to depict kind of in stark relief what that looks like taken to the extreme.
So right? I guess I do actually have a specific question about this. I'm sorry to keep going further into weeds about Ravnica. We're a bit of a nerd about Ravnica.
It's true. We decided if we ever put a cube together, it's going to be a Ravnica cube.
That'll be amazing.
Yeah, it's a good cube.
But okay, so if that's the case, if you're taking parts of society and kind of expressing them, I think that makes sense with a lot of the guilds. What does that say about Golgari? Or what does that say about Rakdos in my mind? Totally. So we have the death and decay shamanic tradition, and then like the hedonistic, but in a it's not like the Gruul where it's hedonistic in a fun way. It's more hedonistic in a sadist way. Like what kind of what does that reflect?
Rakdos is, I'll start there because at the time I worked at Wizards, I very much identified as Rakdos. Right?
That was my first one. That's what I said. Orzhov wasn't my favorite at the time. Rakdos was my favorite at the time. So
that's awesome. Okay, well, fellow Rakdosians. So the whole point about Rakdos is not just like it's a carnival and like in the sense of like a meat consumption festival, right? That's what carnival etymologically is, right? It's a circus, but it's very much about like sacrificing tomorrow in favor of today, right? It's basically about like YOLO, literally. You literally don't know what's going to happen. So like, what if you took the idea of living in the moment to the extreme? Right. And that would involve, it's not just like you're going to have a hangover tomorrow. It's like you might be dead tomorrow. Right. Yeah. It's not just oh, this is really cool. It's like, it's only really cool if somebody else pays for it, right? Mm-hmm. And I think like if the color black in Magic, it's not, for folks not familiar, it's not like a good and evil black and white or whatever. Black is ultimately about selfishness, ambition, the elevation of the self, the elevation of one's group in favor at the expense of other groups or whatever. Yeah. And red is about, emotion, passion, romance, love, but also anger, impulsiveness, the two sides of the same coin. And so Rakdos kind of sits at the intersection of like, what if you just totally give in to your impulses at like every moment of the day? And the answer is, it's kind of like being shot out of a cannon, right? Yeah. Like you might have a really big time until you land. Yeah. And so all of Rakdos's mechanics are designed to reinforce that idea, right? So it's like, you unleash mechanic.
Yes.
Oh, you're going to be bigger, and you're going to be bigger right now. But like, oh, you can't block and you can't defend yourself. So like, God, hope somebody else doesn't get ahead of you, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what Rakdos is going for. And the Golgari, which is the color of life and death, it's not just about the kind of shamanic tradition, which it is, but it's also very much about what happens when nature intersects with human beings, right? We often love to believe that we're, spiritual beings who are elevated, or intellectual beings who are refined. Golgari always reminds us that we might be those things, but we're also like corporeal organisms composed of like meat and matter, and like the forces of biology and of earth they may not always get us in the end, but they're going to get us a lot of the time, right? And so Golgari is about the process of life and death, and dealing with the fact that like, we like to say like we would love to live beyond ourselves in this like very romantic way. Golgari takes seriously like the literal application of that, which is like, yeah, you might die and like fuel this tree, but that might literally be more important than you. Like you don't know, and so Golgari's mechanics are all about kind of trading one resource for the other and being more powerful in death than in life, and of encouraging you to kind of embrace the reality that like death is actually just a part of life, and you may find your fullest experience of living only after you've gone through the cycle of life and death more than a couple of times.
Yeah, I think you really hit it on you might be like, your contribution might be more in death than it is in life, right? Like, I mean, the fact that Golgaris ostensibly are, they grow the crops, right? They make the food.
Right.
And, that comes from death and the death of the individuals, who live in the society. I think it's a perfect example of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I feel like, for the folks at home who may not be familiar with Magic the Gathering, it might be time to go.
This is terrible.
Yeah. We might want to move on a little bit. But you let's just kind of go back into the narrative of your career a little bit. So you enter into Magic the Gathering. You do a lot of good work. I think a lot of good sets kind of come out of your tenure. But at the time, you're writing a blog, right, for Magic the Gathering's website, which what is it called again off the top of my head?
It's called Latest Developments.
Yeah, it's Latest Developments. It's
column.
Yeah, it's no longer available. You can't read it. I tried on the Wayback Machine, couldn't find it even on the Wayback Machine. I'm sure you could if you were better at the Wayback Machine than I am. I don't do this often. But you weren't super popular with some aspects of the community. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that, because, I think nowadays it's a lot more common for the average person to experience being disliked by people they don't know. Maybe they have a tweet or a post, or maybe their business is kind of like the focus of some sort of combined attack on the internet or something, and they understand that we've kind of 15 minutes of fame. Everybody's famous for 15 minutes. The Warhol thing, also everybody's kind of hated for 20 minutes. But you went through that a little bit earlier. Can you talk a bit about maybe some of the lessons you learned, or explain to people sort of what that was like, or why people were so passionately opposed to your to your process?
Yeah, I actually really appreciate y'all bringing that up. So basically, like, not only was I kind of the designer of Wizards or one of the many designers in Magic, I was also kind of the face of the part of Magic that made the decisions about what you could do in tournaments, what the final cards look like. And I was by no means all or even the most important person involved in this process. I think Eric Lauer, Dave Humphreys, Matt Place, Tom Lopelli, folks like that, you know, I don't want them to hear this and be like, Zach, you didn't do all that. I did, you know, but I was kind of the face of it for a little bit. And I think there's a few things going on that have been, frankly, like very useful for my career since then. You know, not only are you the person who's very visibly making the decisions that affect tens of millions, now almost 50 million people all around the world, you're also the person that like competed for a job that I think a lot of people like really want, right? You know, very visibly, it's like, you know, how amazing must it be to be able to work on the game that you've played since you were 8 years old and create art every day, create games every day, create a gameplay experience every day. And so, you know, and the goal of art, the goal of games, the goal of experience design is to incite emotions in people, right? And hopefully emotions that illuminate, you know, dimensions of experience that you wouldn't see otherwise, but like you're getting people emotional, right? And it turns out that when you're getting people emotional in ways that, you know, you might think are good for them or good for the health of the game, but they don't necessarily experience that way, that can really light people up, right? And it can light people up, especially when you're wrong and you're visibly wrong. But it can even light people up when you might be right, but it feels bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, something that you're kind of going over, I think, a little bit is just how passionate these people are. You know, how you know, because this is their community, this is their life. You know, this is all that they care about, and that added element is important.
And I'll say for folks that may or may not play Magic more, you know, Magic is not a cheap hobby. No. Like, you know, and again, kind of trying to steel man the position, because it's easy when you're in the position of just getting lit up by strangers on the internet to be dismissive and to say, oh, nerds, you know, or whatever. But like, you know, taking it as seriously as possible. If you play Magic every Friday night, you know, that's hundreds of hours a year, right? If you're buying new release, this is $1,000, $2,000. I mean, I remember when we were doing the econometrics of like modeling Magic player spending habits. We had more in common with like Mercedes than we had in common with like the Legend of Zelda, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I know people, and frankly, I'm one of them, even though I don't want to be, that have like a considerable percentage of their like net worth in Magic cards.
Yeah.
Right. And like you may not even be trying to do that. And you just look back at your collection, you're like, good Lord, I could buy a house with this.
Yeah.
And so, you know, so I say all of that to say, I think that like people not only experientially, but like literally invest a huge portion of their sense of self, community, belonging, all these fundamental human needs in the game Magic. And it's even more severe than that, because as we were talking with Golgari and Rakdos, there's a dimension of Magic that's self-expressive.
Yeah.
Right?
100%.
You know, you play Orzhov because it resonates with you, because you believe in the values, or you at least resonate with the values that the decks and the experiences embody, right? So I say all of that to say, like, so to deal with that, and then to have somebody who's a high-profile person, who's an opinionated person, like I certainly am, who's in public, you know, saying like, I have power to dictate the experience that you have, and I understand reality in a fundamentally different way than you do, and I get to make the decision and you don't, and you are on the receiving end of that decision. It makes sense to me why that really animates people. I wish they hadn't threatened to kill me.
Yeah. I was going to say, do you have any specific stories about what that results in? You know, just for the sake of the audience.
Yeah, there was at one point I was out in San Francisco. It was actually hilariously, a guy interviewed me for his kind of version of a podcast, and I kind of looked like this in a room. There was like a shading light. There was like it was kind of like a basement. I should have been a little bit more suspicious, but he interviewed me when I was interviewing for my Loose Fellowship, and I just kind of thought nothing of it. A lot of Magic players had podcasts or stories or whatever, but later on he attempted to kidnap me from a van. And, I was standing at the corner, and like a guy like opened up a van and like tried to like drag me, and it turns out that I was a bit of a bigger guy than he was. And it turns out that it's not like, watching The Italian Job, like there's multiple bodies moving, it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
So I wasn't ever really like seriously in jeopardy, probably, but like, it'll get your attention.
Don't sell yourself short. That's scary. that's a rough experience, regardless of, how it's stacked against you, so do not envy that. Yeah.
And then, when I was leaving Wizards, I kind of wrote an article about leaving Wizards. And I think that, it's I got an opportunity that a lot of people didn't have and that a lot of people wish they'd have. And I was very publicly, I wasn't getting fired. I was just leaving because there was something that I wanted to do that was more important to me. And I got a lot of, more than 10, you better watch out. I know where you live. I'm going to get, how could you watch away? You ruin my game and then you leave. Death threats. Literally death threats. And, again, you don't necessarily take them very seriously, but it gets your attention.
Well, seriously enough for at some point somebody attempted to, apparently in a failure of a way, which, I think is a bad reflection on their character. That they failed to hit
right, exactly. Come on, if you're going to do it,
do it right. Get a couple of accomplices. Come on now.
If you're going to do it, you got to be a good craftsman in all that you do.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Be proud of your work.
But that must have been, I imagine at that point, because you were on your way out, that it was still disheartening, but at least you were on the other end of it, right?
Yeah.
This isn't your world anymore. You're not as high profile. Like, how do you, I don't know. I imagine you at least were confident in what you were doing, which is important, right? You thought you had the right direction for the game, and in our impression, you did. We weren't pro players back in the day.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
we thought the direction of the game was swell at that period, but it's tough not to take that stuff personally, right?
Totally.
And as you're working into your next stage of life, how do you shed that off properly? Like how do you say, okay, that was me then, this is me now. I'm confident in who I am. I'm confident in the decision that I'm making.
I think there's a couple of things that are going on. Like the first thing is that like no matter what you do, there's going to be people who are like viscerally in opposition for you, and they're going to sincerely believe what they think. Now in many ways it was good training for, we don't say we're in politics, we say we're in the business of civic moonshots, but we're working with, the White House, right? We're working with major civil society organizations. There's people that we take funding from that, many people believe are either evil or are the greatest thing that happened to America, right? Yeah. And we're seeing right now with election officials, with everything that's going on, like people are animated, and are threatening. And the reason that people will threaten the lives of people that are administering elections who they've never met, or people on a school board who they've never met, is because people feel very serious about these things.
Yeah.
And what I have to say to myself is like, so do I, right? Like that's why I've dedicated my life to making magic, working on policy, doing all these different sort of adjacencies. And so it makes sense to me that if I take them seriously enough to devote my life to, it would be surprising to me if no one took them seriously enough to try and take my life to do it, right? Or to stop me from doing it, right? And that doesn't make it right. And it certainly doesn't make it good. It certainly doesn't make it healthy. But I think that it is a useful perspective. Like, it's we've all experienced, I think, like the temptation to like cosplay through life, right? It's like, really what I do doesn't matter, but it's painful to admit that. So I'm just going to inflate my own self-importance or whatever.
Yes.
But it's like, if you mean what you're saying and you mean what you're doing, whether it's being a parent, whether it's starting a business, whether it's taking care of your family, whether it's, it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether creating art, passing, like anything you do is going to have real stakes for tons of people beyond yourself. And is going to matter every bit as much to somebody else as it matters to you. So I think magic was a really extraordinary kind of training ground for the experience of being in an environment where like your decisions mattered. Like they were going to affect people, and people weren't always going to love how they were affected by that. right? And if you believe that people are not NPCs, but are like 3-dimensional persons whose, feelings, whose humanity, whose dignity, whose experiences are worth taking seriously, I think you have to engage with that and try to accommodate that and try to intermediate with that, rather than just automatically kind of like dismissing somebody out of hand, even if you think you're right? Because that's, not to overstate things, but like that's the path to dehumanization, right? Is to basically be like, everyone who's not me is not a person, like that.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty bad track record in the scope of all ideas.
That's you're kind of giving me a little emotional a little bit. So it's a good job on that front.
Thank you.
But that sort of made me think back to why that hobby attracted us in the first place. And it's something that we've moved on from, and we're into different things at this point, but
into podcasting.
Yeah, right? Into podcasting. I mean, I do it for a living, so whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Not this show. This show is not. I'm not making a living off this show.
No. You don't want to see the numbers on this one. The financials?
The financials?
Not looking good.
Better than you think. Not amazing.
looking good.
But, the reason we got into the game in the first place is it was because, we weren't the type of demographic of person, not like, as in saying like our race or et cetera. That was, but we weren't very popular, right? And I've talked about it before, but a lot of really strong instances of like Disney Channel original movie type bullying and all that stuff, right? But the people who were very unquestioning about us and about what we did or what we liked were the people who played something like Magic the Gathering. And I remember the times that I spent playing the game were almost entirely not, they were during lunch. Not in the lunchroom.
Not strong enough and confident enough for that.
We were in the counselor's office. In the counselor's office, she let us play, and it was a begrudging peace that existed between the two factions, right? But like sitting there and seeing somebody play, I just have really distinct memories of somebody successfully casting an Eldrazi or something, and you're just sitting there, and you all these people who traditionally would not have been friends, who had no real relationship, were bonding over something. And what you said earlier about like expression and about this being a microcosm of the human experience, and much blood and ink has been spilled over Magic the Gathering and the color pie and all these things as far as a tool of expression is concerned. But you really did feel like the person across from you was having a conversation with you.
Yeah.
Right. That the way that they were playing was a way that they were presenting themselves, and it was something that you were interfacing with, not through what you were saying, but through what you were playing. And so extrapolating that into humanization and in human relationship, I think that's a legitimate path to take. And partially those experiences is probably why people hated you so much, because they were so passionate, because they remembered those lunchroom pariah sessions that they participated in.
I'm glad to know that I've made pariah sessions possible for.
There you go. Yeah.
No, you're exactly right, and I think one of the reasons that a format like Commander has gotten as popular as it has is it's kind of a format that encourages like what your deck is, what cards you bring, what your play style is like an extension of an expression of yourself and what you value, right? And to not, to take that seriously, like. Not everybody is a gifted poet or musician or writer or podcast host or whatever, right? And it can feel deeply invisible and painful to not have a way of rendering the 3-dimensionality of everything you feel into like a concrete form, right? We're not all The Witcher, toss a coin to, we're not all Jasmine. And so being able to, in some ways for the first time, put together a list of 100 cards and say like, there's some essential dimension of me instantiated here is remarkable, right? It's irreplaceable. And I have to convince myself of this because sometimes I'm just like, that deck sucks. You know, that's not the point.
Yeah,
you know,
listen,
there are decks that suck.
Listen, I think we can all agree that whatever Mono Blue is saying about the person playing it, it's not a good thing.
Yeah.
It's not a Mono Blue control. It's not a good thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it. Yeah, we got to start the wrap up here now. But I feel like we could just keep going and going.
Do you have the Patreon question?
Yeah,
Time for the Patreon
so,
question.
for those that are in the know or who care, Patreon / Monomaniacs pod. If you're interested in the post show that we do, as well as some exclusive content, one of the things that you can do is ask us questions and we'll answer them on the podcast. And we've got a question for our guest today. This one comes from Zac and Amber Strehle. And they ask, how did your parents react to the idea of working in a card game? Right. So you were playing professionally for a long time, and then you moved into, actually working for it.
This is your job.
Yeah. Were they receptive? Were they a little trepidatious? How did it come across?
So it's so funny you mentioned that. I've talked with my good friend Brian Kibler about this because we think we might be the only two professional Magic players who are encouraged to become professional Magic players by our moms.
Yeah.
I was playing a lot of chess when I was younger, and actually I learned how to play Magic to play between the rounds of the chess tournament. And my mom took me aside one day. She's like, "Listen, I don't understand these guys. One has a bunch of horses and people wearing crowns. Another has a bunch of like dragons and angels. All I know is when you win one of these chess tournaments, you get like a trophy." And when you win one of these Magic tournaments, they give you $1,000 check.
Yeah.
So I don't know why you're playing this chess game, but like you need to stop doing that.
Yeah, the Beanie Baby story is making a lot more sense right now.
The difference is you could go to the flea market, you get a chess set for $5 and a pat on the face. Your competitive Magic deck, that's a different story. That's a different story.
It cost a lot. Yeah, fortunately, there was at the time, stores gave out a lot more money. You can make more money on drafts.
Yes.
But truly, my mom was who encouraged me to start playing seriously and professionally. My dad also very supportive. And when I went to work at the company, they both kind of were like, how can you not want to like play games for a living, right? And how can you not want to at least have the experience of doing something that's been so important to you for such for such a high percentage of your life?
Yeah.
So
and I
was really wonderful.
Honestly, I'm sitting here right now and I'm getting a little bit. I understand now why people were so jealous of your position, because I feel a little jealousy, right? The ability to kind of go and influence the thing that you love. And there's like a lot of stories about this, and especially nerd culture, about people kind of doing their own thing or working for the thing. A good example would be like the BattleTech community, who kind of kept the thing alive for years, right? Which I'm a huge BattleTech guy, and I stuff like MegaMech, like people making a full Java simulation of the thing without any real support, and then eventually getting supported. I mean, that's real dedication.
I love that you know about that. Yes, or like Dota. Right, which is the passion project.
Exactly. And taking something that innate passion and actually being able to go, I guess, pro with it in a certain way, and back before you got bought out by Tencent and then made a bad product or something like that.
I will say though, as someone who works in video games, there is a degree where you start.
He's a marketing guy for a games company.
A games public. There is a line that you cross where you start to stop looking at it like a game, right? Like something that you're doing for the love and the passion, and you start to think of it as a product, which I think is one of the pitfalls of working in the industry, right? When you're separated from it and you're working, a 9 to 5 in another location, it's like, okay, that's the thing that I do to express myself, to go engage. Totally. It's not something that I have to like think about what I'm doing while I'm doing it.
And that's a huge thing, right? Like it's actually like psychologically kind of a trip to be like this thing that I did not only like recreationally and like to enjoy it, but also like you to some degree can't turn your analytical lens off.
Yeah.
And it's not that, I only pursue recreational activities that I get to turn my brain off. It's just that it's really hard to kind of experience the intrinsic joy that made you fall in love with it in the first place.
Yes.
When you're also deconstructing it simultaneously. I mean, one of my best friends is a film producer. And I'm a huge movie nerd. I mean, I talk about films to anyone who will listen to me. And she and I talk extensively about every movie under the sun. And she said repeatedly that, like, all I can think about when I see this movie is, like, how bad a deal the distributor got, like, reamed over.
I get that, man. I get it.
It's insanely hard. And I think the only way to kind of wrestle with that is to consciously check in and to just be like, this one way that is valid that I can experience this thing is like, good Lord, that marketing meeting was like so annoying. What the hell was our sales rep thinking? And then simultaneously to remember that is part and parcel of making something that is like, I have a tattoo of a movie called Arrival right here. I have a tattoo of a game called The Last of Us. Like, it's something that's so affecting that I want it indelibly on my body forever. Could not exist without the most deeply frustrating aspects of its production.
Enough to buy the recently announced remake for Last of Us 2 that came out 2 years after the game was released. I'm curious. Are you going to be paying for the remake?
Probably not. That was on enough psychological
tattoo. This one step too far.
Oh goodness. Well, we gotta wrap this up. I want to throw out thank you to our top patrons before we leave: Luke Robson, Sammy Roberts, Joe Papalardo, and Zac and Amber Strehle. You guys are what help keep the show going. So thank you for that.
So, is there anything that you want to plug or anything that you want to say before we head out? I want to just say thank you very much for taking the time. I know that you're a very busy guy, and we're not a huge show, so I really do. It means a lot that you would take the time to stand with us.
I love being able to get to do this. I guess I said I didn't have anything to plug, but I guess I do. I'm coming out with a big article about Standard in Magic. If you're a Magic fan, please read it. It'll be on Hipsters of the Coast. And most of what I do all day is try to make big things happen that try to improve people's lives just a little bit. So I guess what I'll ask is, if you're finding yourself talking to somebody you deeply disagree with, think they're an idiot, think they're a moron, know that you're right. Just try to remember that, they're a person. They probably love their parents. They probably love the people closest to them. And they're doing their best to make sense of this maelstrom called life. So if you can check it out, I'll have done my job.
Sounds good. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you, sir.